Hello and welcome back to Polytoots. In the last video we finished up the unwrap of this dude, so now we are ready for the bake. And the only thing to mention before we get started is I did address this in a previous video about the symmetry not applying to what's visible but rather applying to a layer. So I have just gone back and I've re-UV'd like the shoes and the eyes, which didn't get the mirror symmetry. So yeah, I mean, hopefully based on everything else that we've done, you should sort of know how to do that anyway. But yeah, if you're wondering why my UV preview looks different, that would be the reason. Okay, so before we begin, if you remember, way back in like the first video, I mentioned about this name correspondence for baking, in which you keep the same retopo layers as the same name as your sculpt layers, like in the box tree. And essentially what this will do is it will treat each individual object as though it is actually unique and it's not being baked with anything else. So to give you a quick example, I'm just going to bake out this entire character, so as is, with everything there. And you'll see, because I have the name correspondence enabled, what the results will be. So I'm just going to do this quickly. It's going to be pretty messy. Disable that. Yeah, so I'll be back once this is baked. Okay, that's just finished up. So head into the paint room, and as always, the Vox tree menu, your sculpt is always appearing. Even if I were to unhide my sculpt, go into any other room and come back, it just enables itself, which is pretty annoying, and it's definitely something you want to watch out for, because underneath all of this, if I were to just enable the wireframe, you can see that my sculpt is actually there. So yeah, make sure that that isn't actually there. And you can find this menu, if you don't already have it, up in the Windows pop-ups. It'll be somewhere in here. It's just called Vox tree. But yeah, anyway, onto this. So because I had name correspondence enabled, everything was basically sort of taken individually and baked. So the tie, for example, is a great area to use as an example, in that you see it hasn't baked anything through. There's nothing that's been projected on the chest, and so everything, even the eyes and whatnot, everything is just sort of kept on its own. And let me just get rid of all of this, and then I'll do a bake with the name correspondence turned off, just to show you kind of what that looks like. So let me just get rid of all of these first. And one handy little tip, if you're sort of removing paint objects and then also having to remove all the layers, once you remove the paint objects, you can actually just press this button down here, which is to delete all unused layers, and that will just wipe anything that isn't used. So yeah, so now I'll just go bake, and I'll turn this off, the name correspondence for baking, and I'll show you what happens with that. So exact same settings as before. I'll be back when it's done. Okay, that's just finished. So once again, paint room, box tree, make sure that's hidden. And so now, if we see here, and if I go to my paint objects and I hide my tie, you can see that it's been projected through. I mean, my tie object doesn't exist anymore. So what you're seeing here is actually the mesh of the body, but all of those details from those other objects would have been baked onto it. So yeah, it's pretty annoying, especially down here. There are, of course, use case scenarios where you would want to do this. But for me personally, with characters, most of the time, like 90% of the time, I usually have the name correspondence for baking enabled. So something to keep in mind. So now let's actually bake out this character as I would normally. And so again, just to remind, I do keep name correspondence on. But what I like to actually do is I choose to bake everything one at a time. And the reason that I do this is if I were to just open up the bake window again, you do have this inside and outside shell, but these are kind of adjusted on a global range, which means let's just preview the inner one. So you want, you try to kind of match everything up, and so you think, okay, so the inside shell for the head is maybe okay, but it's not right down here, so then you keep squidging it in, but now it's wrong down here. And the same thing goes with the outside one. The idea is you kind of want to get it so that it covers most of the mesh, and then you just want to do some little tweaks afterwards. But in order for me to kind of reach like a suitable point for, let's say, most of the mesh, a lot of these assets are just getting like just a really large bake cage, by which I mean you kind of want these to be as close as possible without the mesh clipping through. And so even if I were to keep sort of expanding this so that, you know, I try to kind of fit everything in, these smaller objects are just, it's just, you know, it's insane. Like, that's not a very good way to bake these out. And of course you can come in and hold control and try to just sort of go around and do little bits, contracting and expanding where necessary. But it's just such a hassle having to do this for like the entire character, so I don't recommend that at all. Instead, just do each piece bit by bit. So I'll cancel that, and let's just start with the body. So let's hide everything else, and I'll alt click on this just so it isolates it. And so now if I go to bake with normal map per pixel, and so now I only have to worry about the body, so I can just do some little tweaks. Anyway, let's just have a quick kind of look around. You can hit this button here to toggle the ghosting, and you kind of just want to make sure that your cage in this instance, the bake cage, is inside the mesh, like at all times. And if you think that it might be getting like a little too close in some areas, you can move them down, though it seems kind of okay. Basically, if you see kind of any sort of wireframe sticking through, then you know that that's an area that needs to be adjusted. And by wireframe, I don't mean this sort of green seam. Those are just your UVs, so don't have to worry about those. So yeah, there's a little bit here, for example, so we can just push that in. That should be fine. And chances are, for the first bake, you're probably not going to get everything completely correct, which again is why I choose to do my bakes per object, because in this stage there's often quite a lot of back and forth. Yeah, so for the outside shell, what I like to do is I try to get it sort of close enough so that it encompasses most of the object. And again, like I was saying before, I don't really condone trying to sort of increase this outside depth so much that it covers absolutely everything, because then you're just kind of reducing the bake accuracy in areas that you don't need to. Toggle ghosting doesn't really seem to have much of an effect here. There is, if you can see my mesh underneath there. So I mean, the head, for example, can actually probably come in quite a bit, so up to something like there. And then all I'd have to do is just expand any area where I kind of see the mesh poking through. The only other thing worth mentioning, I say the only other thing, there's probably tons of things that I'll mention, but just because you have symmetry on, I've noticed on almost every character I've ever done, it doesn't necessarily mean that if it's clear on one side, it'll be clear on another. I'm not entirely sure why. I wonder if perhaps this is just a slight discrepancy with the model itself somehow not being symmetrical, although I don't really know how that could be the case. But yeah, so it's worth checking both sides, you know, so don't just do one side and think, okay, that's all fixed, and then assume that the other side is fixed, because it might not be. There can often be little sort of areas that will catch you out. And the other thing I want to mention, so down here, this seems to be okay for me, but this is it's usually a problem area for a lot of people, and that your groin might be sort of intersecting a bit like this, so your cages are actually crossing over. You should avoid that at pretty much all costs, because it will create some bake anomalies. And essentially, the whole point of this step, the main reason that you're doing all of this to this cage, is to reduce any anomalies that you'll get from the bake. So it's worth kind of paying attention to stuff. But as I said, chances are the first bake will need to be redone unless you get very, very lucky. So for me, for example, I'm pretty sure I saw something earlier while I was talking that I haven't fixed, but I think I'll just throw this in now, and then we'll see what that looks like. So press OK, and I always disable the local occlusion. I don't think it's a very high quality bake, and you also, your only option is this raycasting length, which again you'd have to kind of change without knowing what's going to happen. Like they do explain what sort of higher values would do and what lower values would do, but as far as I'm aware, it's kind of scale dependent on your model. So if you do choose to bake the local occlusion, you can expect a lot of sort of back and forth where you'll have to keep removing the bake, trying it again with a different number, removing the bake again, trying again. So yeah, I ignore this whole thing anyway, because I don't even think the ambient occlusion that it gives you is all that useful, especially since they've introduced the ambient occlusion bake in the paint room itself, which is, I think, on par with like X normal and stuff. So everything here is fine. I will just keep it at 2K. Alright, that's done. So over to the paint room, and again, I'm going to keep reminding you because you're probably going to keep forgetting, like I do sometimes. Make sure your sculpt layers are hidden. Okay, so immediately I can see that I've made a mistake there. It's not a huge one, to be fair. I could definitely just fix that up. Little issue down here. Aside from that, it seems okay. Little issue there. One little tip, if you want, let's make a new layer, and you can just call this layer whatever you want. And let's just fill this with like a bright pink. So fill, we'll just fill the layer and come out of that. And so now, I mean, you can already see what's happened, but if I were to unhide those paint layers, you can see that this is just like a blank color with the normal maps on top. Normal maps are obviously in their own layer. And if you're a bit confused by that, it's because these paint layers that it actually brings in they're essentially just bakes of your material from your sculpt. So whatever you have applied here in the sculpt room will transfer through into the paint room as an actual sort of baked material, which could sometimes be pretty cool. But yeah, so let's just enable these again. And again, hide the Vox tree sculpt. So yeah, this makes it a lot easier to just quickly identify where some issues are. To be honest, these issues are not that much of an issue. Ordinarily, I'd probably just keep them because they're often sort of very easy to fix. But we'll cover that later. So for now, let's actually just remove everything and go back to the paint room. Not the paint room, sorry, the retopper room. Okay, and yeah, this is a bit weird. I've had this issue before where if you put down, like, that pink layer we had, it now for some reason it's like given that to my whole sculpt, which I believe is just a visual glitch that shouldn't actually be happening. In fact, if you hide layer 0 and then bring it back again, now everything's fixed. So yeah, I don't know why that happens. Maybe just looks like a little teeny tiny bug. But anyway, let's do this again. And because we're just dealing with object per object, the previous stuff we've done with the cage is still there. Like, it still remembers everything that we did. So we know we had a slight issue here somewhere. Although I can't work out where. It's definitely, I would assume at least, nothing to do with the inside cage, but I'm going to just push in some of that anyway. And let's go to the outer shell. Let's give it a little bit of a push. So yeah, I'm just gonna, I can't immediately see any mesh clipping through, although it would help if I were to, hang on, okay, and then cancel. Oh no, sorry, it's because I had the ghosting on. So let's go back to where we were. Yeah, so I'm just going to expand randomly at this point, which is a bit of a shame, but only because I cannot identify why we were getting some issues. This inside cage is miles away from the mesh, so that should be fine. Yeah, okay, I'm in the paint room. It seems like we're still getting some anomaly here. To To be honest, I don't know why that would be occurring. But everything else has been fixed. Got a little bit down here, but that's really not a problem. Yeah, I mean, you will likely never get a perfect bake. So having just these tiny little areas to fix up is not an issue in the slightest. It's only really a problem if there's lots of areas that are just, you know, haven't baked right. So for me, I'm probably just going to keep that as it is. And while we're here, I'll show you as well kind of what I would do to fix that. So let's just hide the body paint for now. And what I do is on the normal map layer, I'll just come along and I'll hold shift with the brush tool, and I'll just smooth these out. Now you only want to do this on like really sort of small areas, because it's not like I'm reconstructing the normals or anything. It's basically just smoothing the normals around them. And then for this one, maybe we can try and just smooth that as well. So you see, I mean, that's completely sort of alleviated that issue. So yeah, for tiny little anomalies like that, you might as well just fix them yourself. So again, normal map, smooth it out, go to your base layer, smooth it out. Although it's worth noting, I won't be using this paint layer. The material that I baked through for the body is just an example. But yeah, that is how you'd fix that stuff anyway. So from here, we just need to kind of continue that with everything else. So I would just kind of keep going down the stack. So the shoes, for example. So I select shoes, do this, and I would bake these out. The only other thing that I want to mention right now is you may have noticed that we don't have the body visible either in the retopo or the sculpt, but we can still see it because this is actually the one that we baked. It's coming from the paint room. It's this one. It's our paint object. And so what you might want to do if you want to keep things a little bit sort of tidier in here and kind of easier to identify, if you go to Windows and pop-ups and then just come down here to paint objects. So this is the same window that exists in the paint room, and this will just display that. So I can hide the body so that I don't have to worry about it. And then yeah, I'll just bake the shoes. So I'll do this, get your shells kind of done. So outside, I always make that mistake where I'll adjust my inner shell, and then I'll go to the outer shell and I'll accidentally move the slider for the inner shell, even though it, you can't see anything. So if you do that as well, I just want you to know that I do it too. Okay, that seems weird actually. Don't know why it's kind of expanded out like that. I wonder. Okay, let's hit the reset button, because maybe that was taking that previous stuff we did into account where I was showing the example of baking the entire character. Yeah, okay, so now those are kind of expanding out a lot more evenly. So that's what we want. Bada bing, bada boom, job done, bake it out. And one thing to mention here is I am baking at 2K, but this window for some reason will always default to 2K. So even if I had done my original body bake at 4K or 8K or 128, 256, every time you open this window, at least for me, I don't know if it happens with you, it will default the texture width and height to 2K. And obviously you don't want mismatching texture resolutions, because we're putting this all on the same UV sheet. So yeah, for me, it's handy that it is at 2K because I want 2K, but for you, definitely keep it in mind if you're doing bakes of multiple things that this will change. So I just hit OK on that, let it bake out, already done. And yeah, come in here again with the Vox tree and just give it a quick once over. Okay, tiny little bit here, nothing to worry about. Also just realized we didn't sculpt in any soul stuff, but no biggie. Yeah, job done. So from this point, to save you the hassle of watching me do all of these, I'm just going to kind of continue through, and I'll stop and sort of talk if I can think of anything else that I need to explain. Okay, yeah, so there is one thing worth mentioning here. I did mention it when we were doing the retopo about how this kind of cage system, it really doesn't like super low poly meshes, by which I mean kind of like objects that are sort of so low poly, like it's just, let me go to the outer shell here. You know, we have like one edge ring here, one edge loop here, these flat faces that go around, and then again it's just one edge and then it goes up. So you are going to encounter with sort of those kind of low poly objects some issues where it doesn't really matter what you do, you're either going to get some sort of intersection on one side or you'll have it on another. And one way to alleviate that is just to add in some more geometry just to help it along. Like we could have maybe chamfered or beveled this edge here and also this edge around the bottom. And for the most part that will probably fix it. But I don't want this hat to sort of contain any more geometry than it already does. So I'm basically just going to take the hit on having, you know, like a tiny sort of anomalous bake activity, and it looks like we're probably only going to get like a couple of small specks, and again we've already sort of explained how to kind of tidy those up. That one probably be more of an issue, but I wonder if we can just push that in a bit, and hopefully it isn't going to come out anyway. Yeah, I mean if you wanted you could probably try as much as you like to kind of just tweak some things in here, and you might get lucky, to be fair, but it all kind of depends on your mesh. Yeah, so we'll see what that looks like. The only thing that I haven't actually mentioned is when you do these expansions and the contractions, you're not really expanding like the face per se. The way that it's done is actually by a vertex point. So if you have an area here where the mesh is clipping through, you might just think, oh, okay, I just want to do this, and then it will fix itself. But that's not the case, because it will expand from one of the 4 points. So the decision you have to make is, you know, which point you want to expand it on. It could be just a little bit of all of them. That will probably be the best option. But if you're expanding one and nothing's really changing, then don't expand it anymore, basically. Like, that should be fine. So yeah, I'm just going to do a quick bake of this because I've been talking about it, so we can actually see how it will look after the bake. So quickly just come to the paint room. So yeah, there's the hat. So yeah, we got a couple of tiny little issues, but I mean that's nothing. That's so easy to fix. Okay, that is everything baked. So there's a low poly dude, and yeah, it's always best to kind of give everything a quick little once over. I'm not worried too much about like if there was an issue with the actual sort of material that had been baked, because that would be easy enough to fix. Plus, like I said before, like I wouldn't be keeping this stuff. It's just kind of used as like an example of, you know, something to help me with the texturing process. But ultimately, you know, you would do like an entire texture pass over everything anyway. The main thing you want to keep in mind is just normal map issues. So again, like if it's a tiny little area like this, go on the normal map, smooth it out by holding shift with the brush tool. Yeah, I mean no one would ever know, except you and me. Yeah, so that's almost it. There is really only one other thing to mention, and it might just be like another little 3D coat glitch. You may remember that we put everything in the same UV channel. So, you know, we have one UV channel here. It's called default. But I noticed before when I was doing this, I just bring back my color for the sake of it. Over here, these are actually listed as multiple, even though they all have the same name. And even in the UV room, if we come over here, we can see that it's actually created all of these UV channels. Now to me this kind of seems like a bug, because I'm not sure why this would be the case, because you've already specified that everything is on the same UV channel, but it sort of I mean, I'm assuming because we bait each piece automatically, it treats it as though it's a separate UV channel, which is a bit strange because it has the same name, so it should go into the same channel. But either way, you will end up with a result like this, unless this is an actual issue and 3D Coat developers can perhaps fix it. But the way to actually fix it is if you were to select, let's say, the last channel, and by the way, you do have to kind of do this manually, and then we'll select one of these as a selection type and just grab everything. I'm not entirely sure why that's displaying. Yeah, so I'm only grabbing the teeth, but why is that happening? Okay, well maybe something's about to, oops, do not want to move that. Yeah, definitely do not move them. Something might be about to break, but either way, what I do is I select the UVs in one of these layers, or rather these channels, and then I move selected to the top one. And then you have to go through each one. I don't know why there isn't anything in that one. So do that, move selected to default, grab these, move selected, and yeah, just have a quick kind of check. So that should be everything. We'll find out in a second if it's not. And once you've done that, you just have to apply the UV set, press OK, and then just wait a second because it looks like you can do stuff, but then it will actually load up. So you just have to be a little bit patient. Okay, and once that's done, what you can actually come down here and do is just to delete the unused UV sets. The reason that I wasn't performing this action as I was moving things into the top layer is because you can't actually click this until you apply the changes in this room. So now that we have applied them, we can actually remove them, and we should just be left with one, so everything's fine. And we'll come back to the paint room, and everything seems to be in order for the character. And then over here you can see we just have the one channel again, so everything is now on the same UV channel. Pretty cool. But yeah, so that has been the end of this little tutorial. Thank you very much for watching if you've made it this far. I'm terrible at goodbyes, so I'll just leave it here. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.